sponsored webinars on issues facing the states regarding passenger rail development. So we're very, I think we got a good response to the first one, so we're happy to be doing this again. The Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Compact has three main purposes. Those are to promote, coordinate, and support regional improvements to passenger rail service. From the time the compact was formed, we've very strongly supported the efforts of all the Midwestern state departments of transportation to work together in planning and implementing the Midwest Regional Rail System. That system is a 3,000-mile, 9-state system with Chicago as the hub that's intended to bring faster and more frequent passenger rail service across the region, mostly by improving existing rail lines. The Commission has also strongly advocated for a federal partnership with states, similar to what the other modes of transportation have had for years, to assist with capital investments necessary to build the system. So today we're going to hear from several of those Midwestern states that have already benefited from the first ever federal funding program for passenger rail development, that being the High-Speed Intercity Passenger Rail Program, or HSIPR. And we'll see how the Midwest Regional Rail System and other states and the states within that, how their DOT's plans are being realized through these and other federal and state investments. And we're also at the end then going to get an overview of the status of that federal partnership. So we have several presenters today from state DOTs, from five Midwestern state DOTs. They include Illinois' own Joe Schachter, Eric Curdy from Missouri, Tim Hefner from Michigan, who's also the vice chair of MIPRC, Minnesota's Dan Chrome, and Dennis Slimmer from Kansas. Once those state presentations are over, we'll take questions, and then we'll move on to David Ewing, who is an expert on federal transportation issues, who is also serving as the Commission's federal relations consultant. So I'd like to welcome all of our presenters. Before we start with the state presentations, though, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes talking about the history of the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative and a little bit about the program that initiative has been working on. The Midwest Regional Rail Initiative has been in existence since 1996, and it is 9 state departments of transportation, that being Illinois in alphabetical order, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, Ohio, and Wisconsin. And they've all been working together for since '96 on a plan to bring faster and more frequent passenger rail service to the region. The DOTs determined that the most cost-efficient way to do that was to primarily improve existing rail lines so that trains could travel up to 110 miles an hour. And you see on the map and see it written here that the 8 primary lines, you can see the primary lines and their extensions. We've done some cost-benefit analysis, and the cost-benefit ratio of the entire system is 1.8. That is, for every dollar spent, there will be $1.80 in return. The overall economic benefit of the build-out of the Midwest Regional Rail System is expected to be about $23 billion, with over 57,000 permanent new jobs and an average of more than 15,000 new jobs created annually during the construction. The Midwest Regional Rail System will result in an increase in daily round-trip frequencies and a decrease in the trip time for each of the routes. So here's the main routes that are planned, and I just thought I'd point out a couple of those. One, on the Detroit-Chicago line, we would triple the number of daily round trips under the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative and cut the travel time for each one of those trips by 1 hour and 50 minutes. And on the St. Louis to Kansas City run, we would also triple the number of frequencies and cut that travel time by 1 hour and 26 minutes. So it makes it a little bit more, not a little bit, quite a bit more competitive with driving in each one of these instances. But then the question is, if we build this system, will they come? Will people take the train? And I think that Illinois' example, Illinois' history would indicate that, yes, they absolutely will. Back in fiscal year 07, Illinois basically doubled its state sponsorship for our three main lines that we run with their state-sponsored lines within the state. And you can see the numbers are pretty dramatic here from fiscal year 06 to fiscal year 11. On our main corridor, our most used corridor, not our most used corridor, but the Chicago to St. Louis corridor, our ridership is up over 210%, and the others, while not quite as dramatic, are still pretty dramatic. And the Chicago-Milwaukee line with no change in this is still up 45%. Much of that growth took place during a recession, and so again, when you build it, they will come. But you don't have to take Illinois' word for it. All of the corridors, I believe, have seen some increases in ridership over the last several years. For example, on the two state-supported trains between St. Louis and Kansas City, those grew by 8% a year. And over the last 5 years, that service has seen a 56% growth. It's pretty dramatic. Michigan's 3 routes have seen steady growth in ridership, and Chicago to Indianapolis has experienced an 85% passenger rail ridership increase in the past 5 years. So as overall in the Midwest, all of our state corridor routes have grown 58% in ridership between fiscal year 06 and fiscal year 11. And I will say with regard to Illinois service, our ridership was up despite the fact that we have the same old ratty equipment that we have had for decades, and that our on-time performance is frankly pretty miserable, and there really has not been too much improvement. There's been some improvement, but not a lot in that, if my ridership is any indication. So with faster travel times and more reliable service and new equipment, we can imagine that there might be even greater ridership gains, and that's what we're going to talk about now. We're going to move to each of our 5 state departments of transportation representatives, and they're going to let us know what they've been up to in improving passenger rail service in the Midwest with the help from the federal government with the high-speed intercity passenger rail funds and the Tiger grants. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, let's see. We have a couple minutes for questions if there are any at this point, and otherwise I'll move into Joe Schachter.
It doesn't look like we have any questions at this point.
Okay. So Joe Schachter is the Director of Public and Intermodal Transportation at the Illinois Department of Transportation. And take it away, Joe.
Thank you, Representative. Very, very happy to be with you and colleagues from around the Midwest talking about this very exciting program. Indeed, I'll be talking about the state of rail in Illinois, and it's an exciting state to be in right now when it comes to passenger and freight rail, for that matter. What I'll be talking about first is how we're doing on our 110-mile-per-hour project that is already underway between Chicago and St. Louis. The economic impact here that we're seeing already here in Illinois from that from that project. We'll then go into a brief discussion of the new Amtrak routes the state is building to extend passenger rail to places it hasn't been in years. And then also talk briefly about the CREATE massive freight rail infrastructure project in northeastern Illinois and how that relates to high-speed rail. So starting first then with the map that you've already seen while the representative was talking, this is again the 9-state Midwest Regional Rail Initiative, and the corridor that I will be focusing on is the Chicago-St. Louis corridor, the blue corridor for which construction is already underway. The Chicago-St. Louis corridor is actually part of a much larger corridor, and this was referred to earlier as well, and I'll defer to my friends in Missouri to talk more specifically about St. Louis, Kansas City, but as far as the federal government is concerned, Chicago-St. Louis is not the entire corridor, it's the entire Chicago-St. Louis, Kansas City corridor. In the Illinois portion, we received a $1.1 billion federal grant to bring this corridor up to 110 mile per hour maximum speed. What this will do is add sufficient infrastructure, mainly sidings and the second track, as well as upgraded track and concrete ties along the entire corridor. And all of these improvements will result in at least a 40-minute travel time reduction, and we're actually now anticipating that to be greater. It could be up in the in trains with limited stops, it could be up to a 60-minute travel time reduction, down to 4.5 hours from the current 5.5 hour trip. All of this on brand new equipment, with guaranteed reliability, guaranteed to the point where the Union Pacific, IDOT, Amtrak, and the Federal Railroad Administration all agree that this will be delivered at an 80 to 85% on-time performance rate, with the ultimate penalty being possible, that being payback of a federal grant if that reliability level is not achieved. Again, I'll let my friends in Missouri talk about St. Louis, Kansas City, but we're very excited to be working with them on this corridor. Now, the specific work that's going on between here and St. Louis, if we can get to that slide.
Oops, I took it back. I'm sorry. Let me give it back to you.
Here, just trying to advance the slide here to give you the view of how construction stands at the moment. There we go. We have completed more than 180 miles of new track and tie work between Dwight and Alton along the corridor. That's more than 180 miles, as I mentioned. That's now Class 6 rail. That means capable of higher speed service. Concrete ties, which make the ride much more smooth and also add to the durability and longevity of the corridor. In 2012, we will be upgrading Dwight to Joliet, another 37 miles, as well as a significant portion of the Alton to Mississippi River portion of the corridor as well. This year and next, we will be installing the positive train control signaling. And a very exciting component is a planned demonstration of 110 service in a short segment between Dwight and Pontiac, Illinois, this fall, to give people a taste of what is to come. Later this month, or maybe in early February, we will be sending out, with the state of California acting as the lead, actually, in the procurement of new equipment for not only this corridor, but other corridors as well in our state. That means not only passenger cars, but locomotives as well. The plan is for 110-mile-an-hour service between Joliet and Alton to be finished late 2014 or early 2015. And as I mentioned before, service to be as fast as 4.5 hours. That's 1 hour faster than right now with that high reliability level. The new equipment scheduled to arrive as early as 3 years from right now. Finishing the top and bottom of the segments will take a bit longer because of the complicated infrastructure requirements between here and Joliet and Alton and St. Louis, but nonetheless, the improvements that are underway will bring a travel time down by an hour. What we're seeing in terms of economic activity is best illustrated by what's going on in Normal, Illinois, the home of Illinois State University. Bloomington Normal obtained a Tiger grant to build a new multimodal station that is almost complete. It's well under construction. Since that project was announced, more than $200 million has been invested in the downtown area of Normal, including a new hotel, conference center that are already generating jobs. And this project is indeed the poster child, if you will, for what can be done when high-speed rail improvement comes through a community. And it's very exciting to see down in Normal. More evidence of the economic benefit of high-speed rail is a new rail car manufacturing facility. Just wait for that slide to come up on everyone's screen. It concerns a new factory that's being built just west of the Chicago area in a town called Rochelle, about 80 miles west of Chicago. Nippon Sharyo, the Japanese rail car manufacturer, has a factory that's well under construction. In fact, I saw pictures today that were sent by Nippon Sharyo to us showing how the factory is going. They anticipated being open for business this summer. It's already under contract to build 160 new cars for our commuter rail service here in the Chicago area, Metra. And Nippon Sharyo anticipates being a bidder for the new equipment to which I referred earlier. So the high-speed rail program is indeed generating economic impact locally, as well as the participation of new businesses in our state. And when we're talking about new jobs, what we rely on these projects is proven formulas from the Association of American Railroads and the American Public Transit Association that state that roughly between 9 and 13 new jobs are created for every $1 million invested in rail and transit. So the economic benefit of these projects is quite significant. I mentioned that not only do we have the high-speed rail program, but we are establishing conventional speed service to communities in northwestern Illinois that have not seen rail service in decades. Between here and Dubuque, just over the Mississippi River, in Iowa, we will be establishing service in very late in calendar 2014, with new equipment coming as early as the following year. We're working with the host CN Railroad right now to finalize the infrastructure plan by which construction will then start later this year, again with the goal of service coming in about 3 years from now. This project is being funded exclusively by the Illinois Jobs Now state capital program created by Governor Quinn and passed with, thankfully, by Representative Nekritz and her colleagues in the Illinois General Assembly as further evidence of the state's commitment to bringing rail service to previously unserved areas of our state. Secondly, we're establishing service to the Quad Cities area in northwestern Illinois, to Moline specifically, thanks to both a federal grant of $177 million and a state match of $45 million, again coming from the state capital program. We were also successful in obtaining a Tiger II federal application or federal grant to construct a new train station in Moline, and design work for that station is about to get underway. Construction both on the corridor and for the station to start later this year. And as you can tell from this slide and previous slides, late 2014, early 2015 are really going to be exciting times in our state as we see not only the St. Louis high-speed route, but the Dubuque and Quad Cities routes coming to fruition as well. All of this, as I mentioned, will be on brand new equipment. We received separately from the St. Louis and Iowa grants, which themselves included equipment allocations, a separate and additional $268 million federal grant for new bi-level passenger cars and locomotives that will go on our other existing corridors, the Quincy and Carbondale corridors that exist today, as well as the Rockford-Dubuque corridor that I just discussed. This grant, we're very excited to be working again with our friends in Missouri and Michigan on bringing this new equipment to the Missouri routes and to the routes over in the Great Lakes state as well. So the entire Midwest is being served by this new equipment. The procurement, as I mentioned earlier, is being managed by the state of California, which already owns its own equipment and can help us as we start down that road. We have never owned equipment before here in Illinois, so we're relying on the expertise of our friends in California to help us with the procurement of this. Even Chicago-Milwaukee, even though it's not part of this particular grant sequence, will also be receiving new equipment funded by the state of Wisconsin and built by Talgo at its factory north of the border. Finally, on the CREATE program, CREATE stands for Chicago Region Environmental and Transportation Efficiency Program. It is a group of 70 rail-related projects that are not only rail-to-rail separations of traffic to ease congestion, but also highway-to-rail grade separations as well. Goals being to reduce congestion, improve safety and the quality of life, and economic competitiveness. It's a huge program, $3.6 billion, about a third of it funded to date. And the reason that we're talking about it today is that several of these projects actually coincide with some of the passenger rail corridors as well. On the map in front of you, you can see the 12 starred projects that are already finished. I suggest that for those of you who'd like more information specifically about CREATE, there's a wonderful website, createprogram.org, chock full of data on CREATE. But just a couple of notes about it for this group. CREATE was designed to really help the high-speed rail program. Two examples here, the Chicago-Detroit and Chicago-St. Louis route. For Chicago-Detroit, already in final design and to go into construction this spring is the Englewood flyover, a separation of the Norfolk Southern Main Line that carries trains to Michigan and the East Coast from Chicago, and a line that carries the very congested Metra commuter rail service along what's called the Rock Island District. Separating these routes will significantly improve reliability for both users of both main lines. Completion expected in a couple years. Then along the Chicago-St. Louis route, CREATE includes two rail-over-rail separations to again ease bottlenecks just southwest of Union Station in Chicago. So CREATE and the high-speed rail program and passenger rail all very much intertwined in our planning efforts here in Illinois. This slide just has my title and my email address. Happy to take questions at the end, or feel free to email me at this address. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Joe. Lots going on. So now we'll move from Illinois south to Missouri. We have Eric Curdy, who is the rail administrator at the Missouri DOT. So Eric, you're on.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and thanks for attending today. We have an exciting topic. I am new to rail. MoDOT is doing a massive reorganization, and then this has been one of the funnest things I've ever done in my career. So I remember being in a meeting in North Carolina in August or September, and they kept putting up quotes about this program will never work. You're never going to see anything. It had all these quotes from editorials around the United States that an FRA administrator was presenting, and about all the problems, and everybody thought it was about passenger rail, but actually he pulled them from papers when they implemented the Interstate program. So it was kind of humorous to see the parallels going on, and there's definitely been some challenges in implementing this program. But it makes it all the more exciting. This is kind of a summary of the grants that we received in the first round of funding for high-speed intercity passenger rail development, approximately $50 million, about $44 million for actual infrastructure projects, some money for new design work. As my colleague in Illinois said, we're also part of the new equipment purchase, and then we use the money too to fund our state rail plan. This is the, oops, too many. There we go. This is the corridor basically between St. Louis and Kansas City, and as Illinois expressed really well, this really is a larger corridor, but this kind of details the stops are in green and the termini of the Missouri limits are in yellow, and it runs along the river, the Missouri River for most of it. Between Jefferson City, our state capital, and St. Louis, we had one major bottleneck, and that was the Osage River Bridge. That was the only single track point between Jefferson City and St. Louis, and we are going to letting on that job next week. Actually, we're going to have the bid opening, so we're very excited to get that going. It took a lot of work to get there. As I mentioned, it's pretty difficult. But some of the other jobs we've done is the third main line. We have the second and third largest rail yards, rail hubs in the United States. Second would be Kansas City. Third is St. Louis. So we're putting a new line through the St. Louis yard. We're building a new approach to a bridge that crosses the Mississippi River, putting in some universal crossovers, and we're doing a number of upgrades on the line to crossings to improve safety and reliability. Prior to the high-speed rail program starting at the federal level, we did a project in California, Missouri. Missouri had horrible on-time reliability. Ridership was low, and we put a siding in. We noticed there was a significant bottleneck around California, Missouri. We partnered with the FRA and with Union Pacific Railroad and built a new siding there and saw on-time performance go straight up, and ridership followed. UP then followed that with their own money and built another bridge over a river between Jefferson City and St. Louis to double track that. Then we made stations improvements and those kinds of things. Finally, again, I talked about the Osage River and bridge that starts soon, and the new state rail plan. I have a touchy mouse, I'm sorry. You know, we really are focused on key things for the program are improving our reliability. Missouri is experiencing 89% reliability today. We want to increase our ridership. We are at our 5th time all-time high. Those numbers continue to go up. We had in the first quarter of this year 21 days of the track being closed due to flooding. Also, then we followed that with maintenance on the line, and we only lost about 8% of our ridership if you looked at that month the year before. So we have strong support on our route, and it is growing. I believe that that'll go up as we get new equipment and we further increase reliability with the infrastructure we're getting ready to put in. We think too that we want to compete with we can compete well with the I-70 corridor. It's a interstate that runs between St. Louis and Kansas City. We think that this route, once the reliability will be there and frequencies increase, it's almost you can do trips on that corridor better on the train than you can in a car. So we're excited about that, and just what it does for the job creation in our state and how that's helping our economy and ensuring that we've got options out there for folks to use when they're moving around in our state. So that's all I had as a short and sweet, and take questions in the end too.
Great, thanks, Eric. You know, as someone who keeps an eye on what goes on in Missouri, some of that work, that infrastructure work you've done has made a huge difference in your reliability, because it was abysmal for a long time there. So yes, that's great stuff.
Thank you.
Next, we have Tim Hefner, who title is the Administrator of the Office of Rail for the Michigan Department of Transportation, but more importantly, he's MIPRC's Vice Chair, and I'm grateful for that. So, Tim, whenever you're ready.
Lane, Representative Neglick, thank you for your leadership, and Happy New Year to everyone. I think it's going to be a very great year for the Midwest, and if the bowl games that went on earlier this week are any show, it's going to be a great year for Michigan. But what I'd like to do is just kind of run through this quickly for you. One of the things when Governor Snyder came on board is he asked for kind of a review of a lot of different programs. He wasn't really sure where he was on high-speed rail, and frankly, I'm having a little bit of technical difficulty here as far as the slides changing. There it goes. Did it happen for everybody else right now? But with that said, one of the things I'd like to do is just kind of talk about what we talk about in Michigan is not high-speed rail. I think that you've seen a lot of articles around the country that are complaining about what we're doing is not really high-speed rail. And, you know, we stepped up and said, the governor actually recognized this in his very first briefing, probably the second Monday that he was on the job. What we're doing isn't high-speed rail. It's accelerated rail. It's really what we need to do to take and provide faster, better, cheaper, safer, smarter transportation products for the citizens of the state of Michigan and the Midwest. So we've acknowledged that by kind of talking to not to high-speed rail, but to the accelerated rail program. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about the commitment at state, the federal level, how the better, smarter, cheaper, faster, safer works, and just a brief moment on a couple of other projects. The federal commitment is, no, this is a little hard to see, but you know the basic bottom line is there's been a lot of money flowing, and we're going to be looking at moving forward on a lot of construction this summer. One of the things that most people aren't aware of is the state of Michigan has a long history of not only working with the railroads, but owning a railroad. When I started my first job in the railroad business in the Michigan Department of Transportation, I was chief engineer of nearly 900-mile rail system that we had. We got that down to about 350 now, but we're currently negotiating with Norfolk Southern to buy another 140 miles of railroad between Kalamazoo and Dearborn. So we will have the largest segment outside the Northeast Corridor of passenger-friendly ownership anywhere in the country. We have 100 miles owned by Amtrak and 140 miles that'll be owned by Michigan for about 240 miles of a just over 300-mile corridor. We think there's a lot of opportunities, not only from the passenger side, but also the freight side with that type of ownership. Waiting for the slides to
Go ahead
react.
And click again, Tim.
I did.
Okay. Here it goes.
But really, when we talk about it, we're really talking about it from both the freight and the passenger standpoint. From the passenger standpoint, we want to increase frequencies, increase reliabilities, reduce the travel time. That'll increase revenue. We want to expand the customer base, and our Economic Development Corporation is going to be working very close with MDOT and Norfolk Southern on trying to increase the businesses and industries that are using, most particularly the line we're acquiring, but also all rail in Michigan. The faster part there is really about going to 110 mile an hour maximum speed, and freight speeds are going to be 79. We're going to have we just got approval. Joe, I don't know if you got notification yet, but we did get approval of the consultant contract for the environmental work yesterday from our CSRT team. So that announcement is out on our website now. But we're going to be going forward with the Tier 1 environmental work for the dedicated passenger line between Chicago, Union Station, and Porter, Indiana. That will benefit all the trains coming out of Chicago Union Station to the east in Illinois and Indiana and in Michigan, as well as the Amtrak long distance trains. Talked a little bit about the ownership. Joe mentioned about the high horsepower performance locomotives that we're going to be working on the acquisition with California, and then the benefits for freight capacity. One of the things when we got into the negotiations with Norfolk Southern and the FRA on the acquisition, it came clear that Norfolk Southern's concern was a major production facility that Ford has on this line at a place called Wayne Junction. Ford is very important, as most people know, to Michigan's economy, and we weren't going to do anything that would damage that. We very quickly came to an agreement that what we needed to do was double track that piece of railroad. When we made the announcement that we were going to be going forward, that we had reached a tentative agreement on the acquisition, we made contact with Ford to let them know that we were there and that we had reached agreement and what we were going to be announcing, and they wanted to be a part of the actual press release and everything that came out. It did get a little bit upstaged because that was the same day that Ford announced their union agreement on the next 4-year contract that they had just reached with the UAW, so they stepped out of it. One of the projects that we've been looking at for a long time, and this is where you can put in a relatively small amount of money but get a pretty good payback on it, is the West Detroit project. This is where we're building a connection from the Norfolk or the Conrail shared assets onto the Canadian National, the red line that you see at the bottom of the screen. That's about an $18 million project, but we think it's going to be about approximately 10-minute savings for each of the 6 trains today. So that's an hour train time savings each day, and when you look at about 20,000 people a year, we have 20,000 person hours of travel time savings on an annual basis for the $18 million investment. We think that's a pretty good return on our investment. Oops. Let me try to back up here a little bit. I think I have to go one more. Technology and I are not always the greatest partners. When something like this comes up, our staff around here generally cringe. In fact, it's so bad right now that they dumped my laptop, they dumped my desktop, and they brought me in a laptop to do this presentation. But I talked a little bit about the ownership and transfer and the acquisition, and that's the piece of red there that you see on this one. Joe talked about the terminal area in Chicago and CREATE and everything, and that's a project that I can remember back. I think it was actually Safety when Illinois was putting in a request for an earmark on that. Back when earmarks were a good thing, that the state of Michigan Department of Transportation actually wrote a letter of support for an earmark project that was going into Illinois. So this just shows the long-term history of partnership that the Midwest states have had in working on rail transportation issues. The better part, Joe mentioned about the equipment. The key there is I look at the equipment as really the sexy part of intercity passenger rail, accelerated rail. That's the part where the customer's butt really hits the seat. And that's the part where they spend the most time, and it's really the importance of the larger windows, the modern, comfortable seating, the new amenities, the modern equipment. Joe mentioned the age of the equipment, and you know, it does a good job. It's put in its time, but it's time for it to be retired, and that's why we're so glad to be working with Illinois, the other Midwestern states, and California on the multi-state application. Reliability. You have to be able to tell people when they're going to get there, and you have to deliver on that. But you also have to increase the frequencies. It's not how fast you go. It's how little you go slow. And it's not, you know, you never ask how fast the plane is going, but is the plane going to get you when you say it's going to get you there, when they tell you it's going to get you there? So we look at that. Stations are the gateways to the communities. So that's an important part where we partner with the local communities and let them take the lead on that. You can kind of see the current station projects on this next slide. We're not talking about adding any new stations on the Detroit-Chicago corridor. We have a good station deployment about every 20, 30 miles. Gives us time to get up to speed, make good travel time. But we also have a lot of relatively large urban areas all the way along this corridor, so that we need to service those. So we've got the 4 or 5 projects that the stations are going on. We've had some station projects going on for the last couple of years that are completed, but we feel we're in pretty good shape on the station aspects of it. The cheaper part of it, you got to increase your ridership. Increases revenue, reduces your operating costs. We do have a concern about the Pariah Section 209. That was probably the biggest topic of discussion for Governor Snyder and his administration when they came in, as to were we going to do at that time high-speed rail, or today accelerated rail. What was the cost going to be? What we really did is we sat down with them and we showed that by implementing high-speed rail or accelerated rail, increasing the frequencies, decreasing the travel time, increasing the travel options, ridership would increase, the operating costs would go down, and we would be able to narrow that margin so that the amount of money that the state had to provide as subsidy ultimately would be going down, as compared to if we did nothing, to have the continued poor on-time performance, declining service parameters, and all that would reduce the ridership, ultimately increasing the cost and the state subsidy. So we really see that this is a way in the long term to decrease the state's commitment on the operating side, while increasing the capital component. And we also see that there's some real economic opportunities. If you listen to Monsanto and DuPont and Dow Chemical with some of the products that they're coming out for farmers, you know, they've had a 50% increase in crop yield over the last 10 years, and I think it's by 2025 or 2030 they expect to have another 50% increase from the same acreage. We need to have the rail infrastructure to move these products out. So that's another reason why we're getting involved in this, and it helps offset it. You've seen pictures of the Midwest, and you've seen pictures of including what we're going to do in Ohio. One of the things from Michigan's geographic location is we're a peninsula state when you look at us from the continental United States, but we're the epicenter for trade with our largest foreign partner, Canada. Basically 50%, 60% of all of our trade with the U.S.'s largest trade partner flows through Michigan. With that, we spend a great deal of time talking with Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, but we spend as much time talking with the province of Ontario and the Canadian government. And the long-term goal is for us to take and reestablish international train service with connections on through Toronto, Ontario, and Ottawa and Montreal. That was another thing where Governor Snyder, when he came in and said, "Where's the Canadian connection? We need to get this on the board." With that, we have another large project that's not part of the high speed, but it's part of a private sector consortium to build a new tunnel under the Detroit River so that we can handle the high-max domestic auto racks and then the domestic double-stack container tunnels. We already have one at Port Huron-Sarnia, but we need one to replace the tunnel at the Detroit-Windsor Gateway. The equipment, we've talked a little bit about the acquisition Joe did. I don't want to spend too much time on that. The safer part, new technology. The grade crossing starts that we were able to come up with for our ITCS program, which I'll touch on in a little briefer, are actually the technology that they use to solve the at-grade crossings problems on the Northeast Corridor in Mystic, Connecticut. That was developed right here in Michigan. New passenger equipment standards and safety standards are going to be helping a lot. And then as much of the freight as we can get moved onto the rail system, the safest way to move things helps us on the highway system from reducing the truck volumes and reducing the interfaces between cars and trucks. Denton Road is an example here where we've been working with the FRA and Norfolk Southern. It's actually on the line that we're acquiring to put up some innovative technology at the grade crossings where you can see the tubes coming up out of railroads on a beautiful summer day with the snow falling in southeast Michigan.
So, Tim, I hate to do this to you, but if you can, I want to try to stay on schedule, so if you can wrap it up.
Yep.
We'll move on.
I think we're pretty close here. I'm just kind of waiting for it.
Okay.
And so, you know, the technology on the trains and the ITCS, we actually have trains going 95 miles an hour over on the Amtrak ownership in Michigan. We're actually at a point now, if we get about 2 weeks, that started after Christmas. So if the end of next week, hopefully we'll be able to go to 110 miles an hour over there. So that's really what I just wanted to touch base with you on. That, you know, there's just so many opportunities and so much going on. It's just it's just a marvelous time to be working in rail. And with that, I guess we'll wait for questions later.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. And Tim, I appreciate your commitment and your enthusiasm for this, because you're taking a lead, and Michigan's taking a lead, and we're grateful for that. And now on to Minnesota. Dan Chrome is the Director of Passenger Rail Office for Minnesota DOT. Dan.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. I'm glad to be here today, and it's always good to listen to my good friend Tim Hefner from Michigan. That 15 years ago we were meeting monthly in Chicago with the early days of the Midwest Rail Initiative, and at that time Minnesota was at the table, but not very actively engaged as a state in developing corridors. I'll give you a brief overview here of our state rail plan, because that's really the driving force of our whole rail program now. Every project in there has been identified. We don't have a variety of projects that are in service and just being accelerated even. We have a network to build. And along with that, I'll talk about some of the corridor projects where we are engaged with our local partners, and then some facility projects also. As I mentioned, Minnesota completed its first statewide rail plan in late 2010. My office has only been in existence in this form for 2.5 years, and we have continued support with our administration and with our legislature and within our department. And in 2009, as a matter of fact, the legislature required us to do the rail plan, but also provided us $26 million in bonding to pursue federal funding if there were to ever be any available. So the timing was perfect. Our rail plan is equally weighted on the freight and passenger rail component. We cannot build a network of passenger rail service in this state without addressing needs, capacity, capital improvements to the freight system as well. We had extensive public involvement. We submitted the document just under 2 years ago. And the awards it's received speak highly for the hard work that people within this agency did, and our partners within the state rail interest to make it happen. Okay. Briefly, the rail plan calls for a robust intrastate and interstate passenger rail system and improved connections between the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And a number of those projects are underway. High-speed service between the Twin Cities, Milwaukee and Chicago. I'll talk about that corridor. The Twin Cities in Duluth, and then the Twin Cities in Rochester. Enhanced conventional service up to 90 miles an hour, connecting other regional centers, important regional centers throughout the state: St. Cloud, Moorhead, Mankato, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, which is a very strong regional center for the Twin Cities, and then Minneapolis and St. Paul. And then the approach is to advance the projects incrementally and simultaneously as demand warrants and funding has been available. I don't believe anybody on the call here is going to say they're going to see $800 million to $1 billion to put in any corridor in any time soon, at least. And so we have to look at how we stage these projects to enhance connectivity, to incrementally increase the speeds and frequencies, and grow the system that other states already have that are and focused on improving. The dark blue lines in the map here are Phase 1 corridors. The Moorhead connection to the Twin Cities, you can follow my arrow, down through Red Wing, Winona, Milwaukee on down is the existing Empire Builder service. That's the only train we have in Minnesota as it goes on its way to and from the West Coast. The line from Duluth is the Northern Lights Express line. We had passenger service there that ceased in the 80s, and the local folks have been the driving force to have that corridor being developed and into the EA work I'll talk about in a minute. Before we even had a state rail plan completed or this office in place. So as with a lot of the other corridors, the driving factor here has been the local governments and the local rail authorities. The Rochester line, it would be a brand new greenfield alignment. It's an opportunity for us to look at speeds of 150 to 200 miles along a new dedicated corridor. Rochester is our third largest city in the state and has not been connected directly by rail to the Twin Cities at all, and we see a need for that to occur. The light blue lines are post-2030 lines that would connect us to the rest of the region and to Canada as well. The State Rail Plan project developments, I'll talk briefly about the 3 corridors we have underway, Twin Cities to Chicago. We're responsible for the Twin Cities to Milwaukee segment for 10 of the last 15 years. Illinois and our partners to the east, Wisconsin, have been developing the Hiawatha service, the Milwaukee to Chicago connection, and Minnesota's always been implied as the leader for the Twin Cities to Milwaukee segment. We are looking at implementing 6 round trips a day, up to 110 miles an hour service, and a reduction in travel time of over 2 hours in that corridor. We were awarded $600,000 of high-speed intercity passenger rail funds in the first round to conduct Tier 1 environmental work. That work is currently underway. We anticipate a draft EIS in July of next year, and if everything else falls in place, including local funding, a strong commitment to our other 2 state partners, we could be in operation by 2016. Again, a lot of our work is still in the initial phases. We're not constructing because we are a good 10 years behind the work that other Midwest states have done aggressively. This is a map of the alignment. The alignment that is chosen to be taken into the EIS is the current Empire Builder route along the river and follows the alignment through Wisconsin from Portage, Watertown on into Milwaukee. Another corridor I mentioned earlier was the Northern Lights Express, and the intent is to reestablish regional passenger rail service between Duluth and the Twin Cities up to speeds of 110 miles an hour with station improvements, signal improvements, and track enhancements as well. Again, this project has had strong local support and has been generated to the state it is right now by that local support until the state became involved in the passenger rail business a couple years ago. Right now we're finalizing the environmental assessment. $5 million of ARA funds were redirected to this project for the PE and design work that will begin this spring instead of next spring, as it says on the slide. And service could commence as early as 2014, 2015. And here's a map of the corridor. I don't know if my arrow follows along, but leaving the Twin Cities up through Cambridge, Hinckley, dipping into Wisconsin briefly, and then back into Duluth is the NLX corridor that we're currently working with folks on. The third corridor I want to mention is the Rochester Zip Rail line corridor. Again, the intent is to implement a minimum 110 mile an hour service, but design it to eventually accommodate 150 to 200 mile an hour service, and it would be a greenfield alignment. Half to 2/3 of the corridor is a rural area. The remaining part is urban, suburban urban areas that will provide some challenges. We have a couple established access lines into the Twin Cities, and we're going to be looking at how we can make that happen. We have a strong commitment, our friends in the Rochester area. This is a unique opportunity for us to look at true high-speed rail on a dedicated corridor, as opposed to conventional speeds on the rest of the system and 110-mile-an-hour service on the Duluth line and the Twin Cities to Chicago line. Right now we're beginning the alternatives analysis work and Tier 1 environmental work. Part of the state bonding funds are being used to fund this effort, along with local regional railroad authority funds. We have railroad authorities, county-based in Minnesota, that have taxing ability to generate funding for rail projects in their county. This is a map from an earlier study. Disregard the alternative 1, alternative 2, but really focus on the yellow area, which will probably be our study area, to determine what is the appropriate alignment to get into the Twin Cities. And we're excited to get that work underway. Another effort we're doing with Wisconsin is looking at a second daily train between the Twin Cities, or actually between Minnesota and Chicago. We have, as I mentioned, the Empire Builders Service, but we have a reliability issue problem there, particularly in the winter when it's coming from the east or from the west, and has that last 8 hours to Chicago is sometimes problematic to keep on schedule. So we're looking at a second daily train. In addition, the times that come through the Twin Cities aren't the most conducive either. 7 in the morning and heading eastbound or westbound at 11 o'clock at night. We're looking at the termini being either St. Cloud to the northwest of the Twin Cities, a new depot in downtown Minneapolis, a North Star commuter rail line, a station in lieu of getting into downtown Minneapolis, and then St. Paul Union Depot. And we'll be looking at ridership, revenues, operating costs, and capital costs for that. Amtrak is conducting that study, and we should have the results by mid this year. Okay. Talk briefly about 2 facilities we're working on right now with our local partners. St. Paul Union Depot, historic depot that at its height had over 200 daily trains, passenger trains coming through it. This is an artist's rendering of the concourse area that's currently under restoration. It's just a magnificent structure. The post office owned the land, the building and the land under it, and we're using it for staging area for bulk mill facilities. So they really left this part of the building alone, and the restoration of it is just, every time we go there, it's just incredible to see. Amtrak's promised to return service from the Midway station in Minneapolis-St. Paul to Union Depot in 2012. Track and other infrastructure improvements are currently underway in the whole, I believe, 30-plus acre footprint of the depot. Minneapolis Transportation Interchange will be a new downtown multimodal facility adjacent to the new Twin Stadium. Currently, it's the termini for the Hiawatha Light Rail Station or train. The North Star commuter rail train also terminates there, and we expect that the Midwest rail trains will also end service in downtown Minneapolis at the interchange. The Union Depot costs approximately $240 million. There's $40 million of high-speed intercity passenger rail funds currently being used to make those track and access improvements. They have a variety of other federal, state, and local funding to make that project whole. The Minneapolis Transportation Interchange, the Phase 1 cost, which really are addressing the light rail and the commuter rail needs, is about $67 million. I believe they have about $37 million secured for that. They just recently received $10 million in Tiger funds from this last round of awards, and they have also a variety of other federal, state, and local funds. So with that, I guess I'll wait and take questions at the end.
Okay.
So thank you, Elaine.
Great. Thanks, Dan. You guys are sort of hanging out there by yourself, it looks like, regionally, so we appreciate all the good work that Minnesota's doing.
Thank you.
So finally, we have Dennis Slimmer, who is going to talk about the new Kansas route that they've been planning with help from a high-speed intercity passenger rail grant. Dennis is the chief of the Bureau of Transportation Planning for Kansas DOT. So, Dennis. Dennis, you need to take your phone off mute, maybe.
Whoops. Dennis there?
Dennis?
Okay, well, we might have to go back to him.
You want to go back to him? All right, well, I'm assuming he'll pipe up when he's back. Laura, are there questions you want to move on to?
Yeah, actually there is one question. There was a question from Lee Morris. How important is the Indiana Gateway project to the Chicago-Detroit-Pontiac corridor project success?
Tim, do you want to take that?
Tim, are you on? Did we lose other people?
I don't know. Did we lose everybody?
I hope not.
You hear me?
Missouri's here.
Okay.
Okay.
Joe, can you handle that?
Partially, although I think Tim would have more knowledge than I of what's going on in Indiana.
Okay.
But certainly it's crucial that the federal grant that is designated for improvements in Northwest Indiana be part of this, because Illinois is just starting now. We've been doing so much in the other corridors, but we are starting to look at our very small piece of Chicago-Detroit and thinking of ways to start moving forward on that beyond the Tier 1 EIS that Tim made that exciting announcement about earlier. But we certainly are prepared to work with the folks at INDOT on the Gateway project. And my understanding was that they were indeed starting to move forward on it. But I think Tim has been probably working with them more than we have.
Yeah, thanks. There again, technology is my best friend. When I put off mute, I hung up, so I apologize. Lee, it's good to hear from you again. And the Indiana Gateway is extremely important to us for the Detroit-Chicago corridor. The 40 miles from CUS to Porter, Indiana is some of the most congested railroad in North America, and anything that we can do to help facilitate the flow of traffic through there, whether it's passenger or freight, is good for the economy of the Midwest and the rest of the country. With that, particularly the Indiana Gateway is of importance for today, because that's what helps get the service that we're operating out there. The 6-round trains, the 10-round trains a day that go from Michigan into Chicago a day. That gives them better reliability, better travel times, and really, continues to help us build the ridership, as well as all of Amtrak's long-distance trains that head to the East Coast. So it's a very important piece of work, and the sooner that can get done, the better off we all are.
Great. Any other questions, Laura?
Yes, there is an acknowledgement that more train service, i.e. increased frequency is needed, but have any of those added frequencies been funded yet in Illinois, Michigan, Missouri, or et cetera?
Joe, you want to talk about Illinois?
Could you repeat the question, Laura? I'm not quite sure I followed the question.
In other words, you're making improvements to the train tracks, and we've seen all this great progress being made, but and Illinois did increase its frequencies, as you mentioned, Joe, back in 2007. When is the plan for adding more frequencies? When is that going to happen in Illinois or Michigan or Missouri?
Well, I can address the Illinois side of that. The initial plan for the Rockford, Dubuque, and Quad Cities corridor, which of course now have no service, is for the Moline service to have 2 round trips a day, and for Rockford, Dubuque to be probably 1, although we will study the possibility of doing 2 round trips a day. St. Louis is going to be kept at 5 round trips a day, simply because of the capacity bottlenecks of adding more passenger trains in the immediate future. However, that being said, we do plan to add 4 more daily round trips when we move to Stage 2 of Chicago-St. Louis, which is the full double tracking of the corridor, depending on federal funding in a few years.
Michigan?
We're, with the money that we have right now, and without having the Tier 1 environmental complete, we can increase frequencies, or we'll be only able to do modest increase in frequencies. But ultimately, where we want to be is at about 10 round trips on the Detroit-Chicago corridor, and then we'll also increase frequency on both the Blue Water and the Pierre Marquette. And I think we were looking at 3 to 5 on those. But when we get through this, the Tier 1 environmental, that will give us a better handle on what we're able to do with the infrastructure that's there. The money we have for most of the work in Michigan provides enough infrastructure capacity to get us out there. But it's getting through that piece in Indiana and Illinois with all the congestion that we need to have more improvements to add frequencies.
And Eric, do you want anything about Missouri?
Yeah, no, we haven't added any frequencies yet. We hope to, but all the on-time performance improvements we've made have been through infrastructure and increased coordination with the railroad.
Okay. Dennis, have you joined us again?
I'm having him call back in. I think he might have been on the wrong access code, so
okay.
Hopefully he'll be back with us in a minute.
Okay.
So
do you want to move on to David then?
Sure. And then we can go back to
Dennis?
Sure.
Fine. Okay. So now I'm going to have David Ewing provide an overview of our federal passenger-related scene. So, and after hearing about what's been going on in the Midwest, the benefits that the passenger rail will bring and the progress that we've made in the Midwest, we hope that you'll feel that a federal-state partnership should continue. And continue at a strong level. I'm sure everyone's aware that there's a lot of debate at the federal level as to whether and how much to fund passenger rail improvements and whether that should be a priority. So to give us an overview of what's going on at the federal level, we have David Ewing. He's been a wonderful asset to MIPRC as our federal relations consultant. David?
Well, thank you, Elaine. It's a pleasure to be with you this afternoon and to really build on the conversation that's taken place and the notion of a strong federal partnership. I'd like to just give you a brief background on the status of federal legislation. The rail pieces that we've discussed for investment, both in capital and operating, are a part of a larger transportation effort legislation, Safety Lou. That legislation expired on October 30th, 2009, and we are currently in our 8th extension. That extension runs out March 31st, and time is running out very quickly because, for a number of reasons, the calendar is very tight. There are a modest number of legislative days between now and then. The atmosphere, as you all know from the press, is highly toxic back here. And as was seen in the Midwest on Tuesday in the Iowa primaries, the presidential silly season is in full bloom. This provides a degree of distraction for the members and for the administration. It is coincident, perhaps, that Super Tuesday, a large presidential primary, will occur on March 6th, yet another distraction. Congress will have a lot to deal with when they come back on Monday to complete the work that they have on the payroll tax and in general and transportation matters in particular. For example, the FAA reauthorization is in its 22nd extension. Part of the challenge that we face in the Intercity accelerated rail community is the jurisdictional maze that we have to navigate to get legislation to move forward. So in the interest of time and sanity, I will focus on 3 committees of jurisdiction one, the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and two in the Senate Commerce and the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. But again, in addition to the highly partisan nature of the debate in Congress as a whole, the real issue surrounding the delay is the fundamental question for transportation infrastructure is how to pay for it. The challenge that the transportation community faces, particularly in terms of highway and transit, is the stagnation in the gas tax and the erosion of the purchasing power of the gas tax. The outlook. Let's drill down just quickly for a few minutes and see where things stand going into this second session of Congress. The Environment and Public Works Committee has passed a bipartisan 2-year bill with the nickname MAP 21. I'd like to highlight 3 particular aspects of that legislation. One, it reauthorizes the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Program. Intercity passenger rail remains an eligible expense. CMAQ, as it's known, has been used by states and groups of states to provide both capital and operating assistance in intercity and accelerated rail development. Second, the Highway Grade Crossing Funds, also known as Section 130, have been consolidated into a larger program. Consolidation of programs is an issue that has taken on a great deal of momentum, and it is, in its better aspects, seen as a way to facilitate states, giving states the flexibility. The challenge is that a large number of programs have been consolidated with a smaller amount of money. And as you recognize, especially from Tim's discussion in describing the fine work that's gone on in Michigan and their use of intelligent transportation systems to provide safety improvements at grade crossings, this is really a critical area for us in the Midwest because it both enhances safety, gets some additional travel time, and has formed the basis really for an ongoing, on-the-ground working relationship with the freight railroads to address these common concerns of safety and efficiency. So we highlight that. During the course of the work on the enactment of MAP 21, Senator Lautenberg, a Democrat from New Jersey, had a potential amendment to provide additional funding eligibility for intercity passenger rail. That amendment is pending in the process. A second committee of jurisdiction in the Senate is the Commerce Committee. It has approved the safety, freight, and research components of the bill, but we're waiting to see the intercity passenger rail title and how it develops. There again, there are 2 areas of real concern. The draft that we have had some access to from the bipartisan committee staff authorizes funds for state-supported trains to meet the provisions in earlier legislation. That's PREA Section 209. Again, Tim talked about the governor's interest and concern and various strategies to really address the operating costs and to drive them down. And PREA 209 and the work in the Commerce Committee title recognizes the work that states like Illinois and Michigan have done to provide additional service, recognize that there's a transition period between reorganizing the costs that are attributable to Amtrak and the costs that would be picked up by the states, and that to give that transition time some funding would be in the best interest. And so it's a piece that we are tracking carefully. Commerce Committee titled draft also includes creation of a corridor planning requirement. Perhaps the last thing that state DOTs and state officials need is another requirement, but I think this one could be a positive benefit to the Midwest, because the Midwest is really a pioneer in corridor planning. Dan alluded to the MWRRI meetings that have occurred and the development of a regional planning process. I think this is a huge leg up going forward and something to watch carefully. Meanwhile, on the House side, in July, the House TNI Republicans have released an outline. They would abolish HSIPR sections 301 and 302. They would reduce Amtrak's operating funds, and like the Senate EPW action, they would consolidate the safety functions. And finally, a RIF program, a financing program as compared to a funding program, would be expanded. Now, this is an outline. It is not in legislative form. It is supposedly under development and to be released soon. In June, it should be noted that Mr. Schuster and Mr. Micah had, again, previewed some legislation towards public-private partnerships in the Northeast Corridor. This effort met strenuous opposition and has been retracted in large extent. In November, Speaker Boehner announced that he would introduce a legislation that combines both energy development and infrastructure investment. The Speaker's goal at this point was to try to find the additional funding resources needed to have a 5-year bill. H.R. 7 would essentially create a funding stream by monetizing offshore oil drilling, and some or all of those funds would migrate into the Highway Trust Fund or Highway and Transportation accounts. You can see that this is really a departure from the user-based funding strategy that has been the bedrock of infrastructure and transportation funding in the past. The whole question, environmental issues of offshore oil exploration in and of themselves are a challenging piece. And there's also the speculation about development and monetizing those pieces make it very difficult. But the Speaker was attempting to find a way to generate the significant amount of additional financing needed to try to make the investments that are desperately required in a way that also promoted energy, so energy exploration and development. Okay.
David, can I ask you to because I still want to get back to Dennis, and so if I can ask you to move it along a little bit.
Okay, then I'll wrap it up with this last slide.
Okay, great.
And that is, this is the appropriation slide. This is the funding the prospect. This is the real money. The pieces that we've talked about in the past were authorizing. This is appropriations. I would simply call your attention to two things. Yes, it is true that the high-speed rail, intercity passenger rail account did not receive funding in 11 or 12, but here's an important number, particularly for the Midwest, and something that you can hang your hat on to look at and be cautiously optimistic for going forward in FY13. The Senate put in $100 million. Now, $100 million in Washington terms is not a lot of money, but in real-world terms, I think it makes a difference. It was put in at the full Appropriations Committee level. It's sponsored by Senator Durbin and received bipartisan support. So that's an encouraging sign. The other piece, and you've heard mention of it, and I'll close with this as a second piece of good news going forward, is look at the Tiger funding. Tiger 1 was about the $500+ million level. Tiger 2, 526, about 500 in the Tiger. So the program is funded. This is a source of capital, and you've seen it used to promote station development and other activities in the Midwest. With that, I will stop there and look forward to hearing what's going on in Kansas and turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks, David. Thanks for putting a lipstick on a pig there. So, Dennis, I assume you're back on from
I hope you can hear me now.
We can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. Sorry,
Fire away.
I'm sorry for the technical problems I was having. Tim, tell your staff that you're not the only one. All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity to bring everyone up to date on some work we've been doing here in Kansas, working with officials in Oklahoma, Missouri, and Texas to look at expanded passenger rail service along a BNSF line between Kansas City, Wichita, Oklahoma City, and Fort Worth. The work itself was funded in part with the high-speed intercity passenger rail grant that was awarded to Kansas. Let me see, I need to, okay, good, it moved forward. The service development plan that we've been working on was completed this past November, and it's been posted to KDOT's passenger rail web page, and the direct link to that PDF file is shown on this slide. As many of you on this webinar know, a service development plan is required by FRA when applying for federal assistance for state passenger rail capital projects. The contents of the service development plan includes analyses that are designed to support the case for investing in the project, such things as purpose and need, a description of the operation of the service, the infrastructure improvements required, the cost of those improvements, rolling stock, and the ongoing operation of the service. And then finally, projections of ridership and revenues are estimated, and analysis is performed of the benefits and cost. As I said, the plan was financed with a $250,000 HSIPR grant, and then Oklahoma and Kansas both chipped in $125,000 in matching funds. The consulting team was from Parsons Brinkerhoff, and we held regular call-in conference calls with the PB team, excuse me, and staff from KDOT, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Texas, and then also received a great deal of cooperation with BNSF, Amtrak, and FRA. We looked at two options. One was an extension of the existing Heartland Flyer service that operates between Oklahoma City and Fort Worth. This option would extend service north of Oklahoma City to Newton, Kansas, where passengers could link up with Amtrak's Southwest Chief that runs between Chicago and LA. The new service would actually begin in Newton and then proceed south to Oklahoma City and on to Fort Worth before turning around and ending up back in Newton. It's referred to as nighttime service since the stops in Kansas would occur during the night or early morning. A separate then daytime service with two trains running each way between Kansas City and Fort Worth via Wichita and Oklahoma City is the other option. One train would begin in Kansas City and head toward Fort Worth. The other would begin in Fort Worth and head to Kansas City. As was mentioned earlier by one of the presenters, we're looking at proposing conventional passenger rail equipment here operating at a top speed of 79 miles per hour, so we're not up to the higher speeds we've been talking about. What we are looking at is 79 miles per hour. Here's a map showing the options. The existing Heartland Flyer service is shown in red between Oklahoma City and Fort Worth, and then the extension, what we're calling the extension, is in green between Oklahoma City and Newton, and it would also, of course, service to Fort Worth. And then the yellow line shows the daytime standalone service between Kansas City and Fort Worth. Some of the findings that were determined, to begin, the annual ridership of the Heartland Flyer extension would be a little over 200,000 passengers per year, including those riders on the existing service. To give some perspective, last year's ridership on the existing service was approximately 81,500 passengers. The projected ridership on the Kansas City-Fort Worth, the daytime service, is estimated to be 270,500 passengers per year. The cost of improvements for the extension is estimated to be $132.5 million, and the cost of improvements for the Kansas City-Fort Worth daytime option is estimated to be $368.2 million. Cost of locomotives and train cars would be $4 million for the extension and $68 million for the daytime service, including 2 train sets and the necessary spare parts. That gives us a grand total of $136.5 million for the extension and $436.2 million for the daytime Kansas City, Oklahoma City, Fort Worth option. In addition, the states would need to share in providing annual operating subsidies, $4.4 million for the Heartland Flyer extension, which would be in addition to the subsidy that's already provided by Oklahoma and Texas for the existing service, and then $10 million for the daytime Kansas City, Oklahoma City, Fort Worth option. And then finally, we looked at a benefit cost analysis that meets FRA criteria and can be used then when we apply for federal assistance for capital improvements. The benefit cost analysis only considered direct benefits and didn't include benefits accrued as a result of economic activities that might occur, economic development activities that might occur. It was calculated assuming either a 30% increase for contingencies or a 15% increase, as that affects the benefit cost ratio. The ratio for the Heartland Flyer extension was calculated to be 0.88, assuming the 30% contingencies, and 0.93 for 15% contingencies. The benefit cost for the daytime service was calculated at 0.61, assuming 30% contingencies, and 0.64 for the 15% contingencies. And then finally, the next steps, our next step in Kansas is to present the findings of the service development plan to the Kansas legislature, and that will take place with presentations to the House and Senate Transportation Committees. We've heard from FRA officials who recommended that work on the service level, NEPA analysis should be done at the same time in this case as the preliminary engineering and project NEPA work. And so currently KDOT does not support taking any additional steps, including the NEPA analysis or preliminary engineering, until funding for the entire project and service is identified by the Kansas legislature. So that concludes my presentation.
Great.
When the next slide comes up, it'll show some contact information for you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Senator. Appreciate that, and continued success to you. So I wanted to just sort of wrap up a little bit with some next steps, but I think that what is obvious from all the presentations is that the federal-state partnership with passenger rail funding is critically important to all the activity that is going on in all these states. It's hard to imagine that too much of this, if any of it, would be going on without that federal partnership. So that continues to be something that's critically important for us, and that's the high-speed interstate passenger rail funding. Tiger funding is important as well, but that seems to, as David indicated, that seems to have a little more support in Congress. And so one of the important things I think that the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission can do is to continue to be in touch with our members of Congress and senators to express how important we think the high-speed intercity passenger rail funding and that federal-state partnership is. Even if it's not getting a lot of support in Congress right now, I think it's critically important that we stay in front of them saying, we need this, we want this, and it's really having a benefit in our states. So that's one of the things we would like to do. And then I think we are going to obviously continue to push for funding for Amtrak along with that, because that always seems to be in peril as well. We anticipate that we would do what we've done in the past, which is take a delegation to Washington, have a meeting of the commission, get an update on and learn a little bit more about what's been happening, and then take a trip to the Hill and do our advocacy, which always seems to be a highlight, which is always a highlight of the trip, but it also, I think, has been pretty effective in getting us and other passenger rail advocates in front of members of Congress to say, that this really does matter. So that's kind of, I think, where we're headed. Laura, did you have anything more to add?
No, we'll keep MIPRC commissioners, obviously, and MIPRC allies aware of the surface transportation legislation as it progresses, and we will be sending out a letter probably later this month on emphasizing MIPRC's priorities. So we're just so glad that our Midwestern states are doing so much with the high-speed interstate passenger rail and Tiger funding that they've been given, and really want to make a strong case for that continued federal partnership. So we're open to others' ideas and other partnerships, and hopefully as a region we can say this is what's been done and this is what we need to do going forward to make sure that our plans for the region, i.e. the West Regional Rail Initiative, hopefully the Ohio Hub in the future, and other plans are in the states such as Kansas, move forward.
Great. I don't know if there's any, Laura, I'll ask if there's any questions that we wanted, like one or two last questions we want to take before we wrap up.
Yes, I have one question, and that would actually be on the last slide, is that someone asked where you can find PDFs of today's presentation. The full webinar will be available on our website, and that is going to be posted under the Activities tab. And also a full listing of all the Midwestern state projects that have been funded by the Federal High-Speed Intercity Passenger Rail Program is on MIPRC's website, and the website address is there, www.miprc.org. Also, MIPRC has the links to the DOT rail offices for each of the states on our website, so that if you want updated information on the progress of any particular state's projects, you can go to MIPRC and link to the various DOT rail offices.
Okay.
I think those are the only two questions I got about contact information. And oh, there is one more that came in. What is the plan / proposed timetable for implementing new frequencies on the Empire Builder route between Chicago and the Twin Cities? Dan?
Yeah, Laura, we're just beginning that work with Amtrak and Wisconsin DOT to look at the feasibility of that. If it does prove to be feasible, we have an issue of the funding for that service. Currently, we don't have a state source of funding, and that will be a major factor. So the timing of it If everything fell in line and we had funding, it'd probably be within 2 years, but it's hard to say where we are right now.
Okay. Thank you. I think that's all the questions.
That's it? All right. Well, I'm very grateful to the presenters who gave of their time and expertise today, and to everyone who's participated in the webinar. As Laura indicated, it's been recorded and it's on our website, so you have that information. Please fill out the brief survey that appears when you exit the webinar, so that can help us in planning our future briefings, which we will be putting together. So again, thanks everybody for participating.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.